In Britain, Tim and Sam, both 11 years old and unbaptized publishers, were engaging in field service with Tim's mother. The boys needed new bags to carry their Bibles and literature, but money was a problem. Earlier, before starting in the field service that day, the mothers of the two publishers made this a subject of prayer. At the last house to be visited that morning, Tim spoke to the householder and read a Bible verse to her. She interrupted him to ask what his religion was. When Tim replied that he was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, the woman scolded him and said to his mother that she could not understand why Jehovah's Witnesses let their children die rather than allow them to accept blood transfusions. Well, that would be a difficult thing to have thrown in your face, a young man there at the door with his mother. Tim's mother suggested that the woman ask the boys how they felt about this. She did. Tim explained that he would always choose alternative treatment rather than go against his Bible-trained conscience. This was from this young boy himself. Sam then said, the other young boy, that his own sister had received alternative treatment and had fared better than patients who had received blood. Then the householder again turned to Tim's mother, and this time she expressed disapproval of taking young children from door to door. We've heard that many times, I'm sure. Both of the boys responded to the woman on this occasion that they enjoyed preaching, adding that they preferred this to roaming the streets like others of their age. Well, this slowed the householder down a bit. She was impressed by their reply. The householder asked the boys to wait a moment while she went into her house. What a surprise they had when she returned and presented each of them with a smart new leather bag, ideal for their ministry. She sold these items for a living. Her changed attitude also allowed the boys to arrange for a return visit. And as they were leaving, the householder's 94-year-old mother, who had been listening, came to the door and asked Tim's mother to visit her at her home. Truly, we are proud of our young ones, and it's a delight when you hear them make comments at the meetings in their own words, and you out in the field ministry with them, and you see them make expressions of faith. We have thousands upon thousands of good children who really are showing that they're mature and they love Jehovah God.
Thus concludes William Malenfant's cameo in the April 2022 JW Broadcasting episode. He has been lecturing parents of Jehovah's Witnesses on how to do parenting as someone who isn't a parent himself. And he's concluding here with a story about Tim and Sam, two 11-year-olds, or they were 11, I guess, at the time, in Britain. I have to be a little bit skeptical as to whether this actually happened. I mean, what's really stopping the writing department from just coming up with a story? But even if it did happen, even if we just take it all on face value, what are we learning here? We're learning that children get dragged around, children of Jehovah's Witnesses, I should say, get dragged around to preach to adults, to persuade adults what their religious beliefs should be. There's surely a red flag here. You know, children who are in the process of being indoctrinated by their parents, claiming to have it all figured out, and presenting themselves to adults in their community as having a better grasp on religion and on how to live one's life than the adult whose door has just opened. I'm sorry, there's just no positive spin to put on that. He brings up the blood issue, and isn't it interesting that the go-to response for both boys, apparently assuming this happened, was, well, alternative treatment? That's just the go-to response. Oh, it doesn't matter that Jehovah's Witnesses die refusing blood. It doesn't matter that they do so knowing that they will be disassociated for willfully and unrepentantly accepting a blood transfusion, if they don't refuse blood, even in a life-threatening situation, and that's in the Elder's Shepherd book, by the way. Let's not worry about all of that, because in some situations, there's alternative treatments. That's not an argument. Of course there are going to be situations where there are alternatives, but what about the situations where there aren't alternatives, which there are always going to be? In some situations, when there is catastrophic loss of blood, and the clock is ticking and seconds matter, a blood transfusion is the only thing that can save the patient. And in those situations, a Jehovah's Witness is expected to say, "No, thank you, I'd rather die." That's the position. So all of this nonsense about alternative treatments is frankly just a distraction. It's a distraction technique. It's intended to railroad the conversation away from the core issue of, yes, but if blood is the only option, would you take it? Alternative treatments, just a distraction technique. And apparently these two boys, Tim and Sam, assuming they're real, apparently they had been well drilled by their parents in how to use this distraction technique of banging on about alternative treatments. Well, bravo. Round of applause. You've been trained well in how to manipulate people and give misinformation and manipulation on the issue of blood transfusions. And then there's this subplot about literature bags and the fact that before they went preaching, they made it a matter of prayer that they couldn't afford nice leather bags for their ministry. Probably one reason they couldn't afford them is because their mother wasn't allowed to go through higher education, and that had severely impacted on her earning potential. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not saying that's definitely the case. I'm skeptical, quite frankly, that any of this happened. But again, taking it on face value, assuming all of this happened, what are Jehovah's Witnesses watching this being asked to believe? They're being asked to believe that a God who sat through the persecution in Malawi, the death, mutilation, and abuse of Jehovah's Witnesses, a God who is allowing Russian Jehovah's Witnesses to be incarcerated, a God who has allowed tens of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses to die through COVID, a God who sat arms folded through the Holocaust, jumps at the opportunity to provide some kids with leather bags. Do you want to worship that kind of God? I certainly don't. I'm interested in an all-powerful God. Let's remember, he's supposed to be all-powerful and all-knowing and all-wise. That being the case, I'm interested in an all-powerful God who stops children from being abused, who stops people from dying. That's the sort of God I'm interested in. I am not interested in a God who supplies people with leather bags. I'm sorry, not a persuasive argument. But the interesting thing is, when you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness, this is the sort of story that makes you all warm and fuzzy. Wow, yeah, this proves that this is Jehovah's organization, because they prayed for the bags and they met a woman, and it just so happened that this woman's profession was making leather bags. How else do you explain it? Honestly. So thank you, William Malenfant, for ending with a ridiculous story that paints a picture of a God that nobody should want to worship, of boys who have been manipulated into themselves manipulating people who they meet in the preaching work with red herrings, with distractions about alternative medicine when confronted on the blood issue. And thank you for showing us that you know absolutely nothing about child raising, assuming that everything that's said in the Bible, if applied to the upbringing of children, will miraculously work. Thank you for proving that you are completely tone deaf when it comes to disfellowshipping and the hurt and pain that this inflicts on families. This is a man, William Malenfant, who relishes child indoctrination, the exploitation of childhood innocence, and it shows in his morning worship cameo.